further. Okay, so this is obviously just a quick tour of the subject, and we hope to run a half-day training course in the next few months on it. So if anyone wishes to express an interest in attending that, please let us know. Otherwise, I'll hand you over to Dorothy to kickstart the session. Dorothy, you're on mute.
There we go. Only took 3 years. Okay, really good to see everybody. Really good to see such a big interest in this topic. We had this session in January, as some of you may know, as an option. And we had a similar participants to then, so that's really good. And of course, delighted to have Laura with us on this. So my bit here is the Equality Act. I'm sure you all know what that is, and I've just popped it up there to just remind ourselves, and we could think about that as we go through the various questions and the conversation with Laura. So research tells us, and we've got this slide and the next, a number of figures and percentages. And the important bit that is that these figures relate to people who have been diagnosed, not those who self-diagnosed. And as we go through this, Laura will talk a bit more about that. So you can see the figures. 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodivergent. 16% of autistic people are in full-time employment, yet 77% want to work. And then the last one there is in terms of 57% reported living from payday to payday, compared to 34% of neurotypical individuals. Burnout, much higher figures. Deferring or cancelling appointments with providers, much higher figures. And a strong connection between neurodiversity and mental health issues. 20% of companies had implemented benefits to support inclusion. 20%, not a great deal. My last slide here just now, this link to a CIPD document, and we'll send the slides out afterwards so you'll be able to get it yourself, is really good. And the big focus on it is focus on what people can do as opposed to what they can't do. So it's all about a strengths-based approach to people management, and thinking through that if we're depending on rigid competency frameworks to manage performance, then that's going to be a problem potentially for some neurodivergent individuals. So all about looking to play to people's strengths and treating people as individuals and what individuals might need, as opposed to this, what are you not good of, and turning down because of not reaching all of these rigid competency frameworks. So keep those in mind, and I will come out of this and I will do my best to pin myself and Laura. There we go. Oh. Sorry, I've lost Laura. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Lovely to see you again, Laura. We did this session a month ago and it was just fantastic. And I think you're muted, so you can unmute yourself. There we go. There we go. So the first question I would love to ask you is, what do you mean by neurodiversity? Because we get, in the work that we do in our travels, we get lots of different understanding as to what that means. So that'd be great, thank you.
Well, I think what I would start with, Dorothy, is let's try to simplify things here. Let's take away the word neuro to begin with.
Okay.
Let's think of the word diversity. And I think people in the audience will understand quite eloquently what diversity in the workplace means. Neurodiversity is very little different in terms of what we would be expecting in terms of understanding individual needs within the workplace, but looking at that from a perspective of that we are all very different, that we're all different from a neurological point of view, as well as from our personalities, our skills, our talents, all of those kind of things. Every single one of us is neurodiverse. Now that might surprise people because they'll think, no, I'm not, I'm neurotypical. But neurodiverse refers to that diversity in the population where all of us are different. There is no two of us that are exactly the same. So everyone has a different skills, abilities, talents, things that they find difficult to do, things that they need help and support with. And all of us fit under that category. So that is neurodiversity. It was a term that was coined in 2020, Dorothy, by an Australian sociologist called Judy Singer. And Judy was quite tired, I think, of neurodivergent conditions being pathologized and made very much down the medical model, the medical route. And akin to what you've said earlier on, it was very much looked at in a deficit way. So what is it that people can't do in order that they get a label of some neurodivergent condition? And she wanted to break away from that and very much focused on, this is about differences, it's about celebrating differences. It's about celebrating differences in the human condition. And let's move away from excluding people because of their differences and actually celebrating those differences and supporting each other. So it was very much a move away from a medical model to a social model of understanding the differences in the human race.
Okay, that's great. That's really helpful. We talk about a person-centered approach to supporting people who are neurodivergent in the workplace. What would that look like, do you think? Or what would you like it to look like?
Well, yes, I think there's two different things there. I think person-centered planning is a term that's been used for a long time now, Dorothy, and I've seen really, really good examples of it, and I've seen really poor examples of it. And I think that understanding exactly what it is that we mean by person-centered planning is key to actually then being able to do it well. Because what I would say to employers is, if you're not going to do it well, don't do it at all. Because what you then do is pay lip service to a process that actually is very, that can have incredibly powerful outcomes. However, it can also be quite damaging if it's done in a very tokenistic way. Yeah. So there's an investment in understanding, first of all, what person-centered planning is. And I'm going to talk a wee bit about that later on, Dorothy, in the case study. Yeah. But it is about looking at who is it that we're talking about here? Is it the employee or is it the employer? If we're talking about a person-centered approach, we're talking about the employee. And we're focusing on helping that employee to be able to understand better what it is that they need to do, that the employer needs to do, that other people might need to do in order for them to be the best version of themselves. And that is very much a team effort. So the onus can't always be on the employee to fix it. It's a shared responsibility. And what works incredibly well is good facilitation, because it's about asking critical questions and being able to look above and behind and below what somebody might be saying to you. And being able to then interpret and analyse that to a point where you're in a position to support that person, to make the right decisions, to be able to support that person to be able to reach the objectives and agree the objectives that's going to give them the best opportunity to do what it is that they're supposed to do in terms of their job. Facilitation is probably key. I think I would say that's the most important thing. Because it's easy. I've been in person-centered planning meetings, Dorothy, where somebody asks the person a question and 3 other people answer it because they think they know better.
Yes.
So I think sometimes we don't like long pauses. So when you ask somebody a question, they don't give you an answer right away. Somebody is really quick to fill it in, or the facilitator is really quick to fill it in. And I think, again, when we're looking at neurodivergent employees, sometimes that processing takes a little bit longer. So the key is in facilitation and ensuring that the employee is at the centre of that.
Absolutely. And you're reminding me that, you know, and we've found this, I suppose, more often than we would like when we're maybe doing mediations or investigations, is our client might contact us before as normal and we're sorting out our terms of reference. And they might say, "Oh, I need to tell you that we think so-and-so's on the spectrum." And it's almost said quietly, like they're on the spectrum. And we're like, I don't know what we do with that, you know, but that book, yeah. How would you respond to that? Or how should we respond to that? Might be a better question.
Well, if we take the example of autism, you can't be a little bit autistic. You either are or you're not. And you hear those kind of terms getting flung around quite a bit. Particularly the one that really irritates me is we're all a little bit on the spectrum.
Yes.
You know, that's quite a insulting thing to say actually to those who do identify as neurodivergent, do identify as autistic or have that diagnosis. Now, the diagnostic criteria for autism, again, for example, is very clear that you have to fit that diagnostic criteria in order for you to be able to get that diagnosis, that formal diagnosis. So I suppose the response that I would give if somebody said that to me would be, when did you become a psychiatrist?
Right, yes, yes.
Because it does feel a little bit like amateur psychiatry and psychology, that people make those decisions to comment based on assumptions,
Yes.
rather than facts.
And sometimes perhaps trying to use that as an excuse or a reason for something without really understanding it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. In terms of what technology could be used in the workplace to support folk?
I think technology has expanded at a rate of knots and continues to. There is so much out there, but you only know what you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes what employers struggle a wee bit with. If they have not encountered somebody who's neurodivergent, perhaps who has dyslexia within the workplace, or dyspraxia, dyscalculia, then they might make assumptions as to what reasonable adjustments might be made. So if somebody hasn't done a bit of research around that, you might think, well, somebody's coming to us with dyslexia, so therefore what we'll do is we'll use colour overlays and they'll be fine. Yes. And now we can move on, and that's us done our work. But actually, there's lots and lots of software out there. There's lots of technology, including things like lighting, and different types of font that can be more easily read. Software that can actually make a page much more accessible in reading for somebody who might have some difficulties with a particular font or a particular colour. However, more importantly is ask the person
Yeah.
themselves. Don't make those assumptions, because that person themselves know where their difficulties are. They'll typically know, my difficulty is in processing information, so I need mnemonics in order to help me do that. So what you'll do is you'll find me doing such and such a thing that's going to help me to do such and such a thing. So being able to find that out then helps that research to look at, well, is there any software out there that can also support you to be able to develop a schedule for yourself, to be able to develop reminders for yourself, those kind of things. So there's that kind of technology. There's also things like noise cancelling headphones, and that again, for anybody working in an office, a busy office, can be a real benefit, because if somebody has difficulty concentrating, just being able to cancel out noise can really help somebody focus, particularly those with ADHD or who have difficulties in being able to process too much information at the same time. There's other technology like voice to text software for somebody who much prefers to speak into a computer as opposed to be typing things into a computer. And there's a range of software out there as well that actually helps people be able to identify a particular white noise that can support them. If they've just got something like that going on in the background, it can reduce some of their anxiety and help them to be able to concentrate and focus more. But I think importantly, it is about that individual person-centered planning approach to begin with. What is it that works well for you, what doesn't? And then being able to look at, well, what kind of technology is out there that we can potentially support you with, that you might find also benefits your non-neurodivergent, your neurotypical employees as well, because some of those things actually are universally supportive in helping people to be able to concentrate and feel calm and have a better well-being.
And interesting too, we came across not that long ago, and this is anonymized, where a young woman, as part of her what we'd call reasonable adjustments or adjustments, was not to hot desk. Everybody else in that team were hot desking. She needed her own desk. She needed her pens, everything sitting where she knew where they were and what made her feel comfortable. There was a significant lack of empathy, maybe, from the colleagues of, well, I wish I had a desk to myself kind of approach. And that leads us to think about, what do the colleagues know and how much understanding is there? And you know, and I guess what we should be doing is speaking to that person who's got the adjustment and saying, are you comfortable for us to have a conversation with you, with your team, and just talk through what helps you? Because they hadn't done that. And, you know, in that context, there were some people who were walking along and they were moving our pen, which was a small thing, but it had a major impact. And it just was escalating into something that should never have gone there.
Yeah, I think that is about understanding, you know, something like that happens. Well, why can't that happen for me? Why doesn't that happen for me? Why have we all not got our own desks? I suppose there's a bit about a needs-led, as opposed to that focus on, well, everybody's going to get a red pen and everybody's going to get a pad and everybody's going to get this. It's more about what's equitable rather than everybody having the same, because again, that's not going to meet everybody's needs.
No.
I think just on that, Dorothy, I think what's important actually, if you are going to be a neurodivergent friendly workplace, is again what I would say around the person-centered planning. It's an investment. You need to make an investment in your time, because what you're looking for is to develop a psychologically secure work environment. And that might take quite a bit of a culture change. within a workplace where people become much more accepting of people's differences. I think one of the things that I remember we talked about last time was Tourette's, for example.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, again, there is these myths out there that, you know, everybody with Tourette's swears.
Yes.
Right. So again, there's that assumption that's made, and somebody then could put they have Tourette's on their application form, and the employer thinks, my goodness, you can't possibly have somebody in the office that swears all of the time. However, a very small number of people with Tourette's have that as a tick.
Yeah.
A lot have, most people have other things. It'd be physical head movements, eye movements, shoulder, neck, that kind of thing. They might shout out something or what have you, but not everybody has that swearing. But one of the things that we talked about before is how can cultures change to become much more acceptable? And the example that we talked about was Pete in the Big Brother house. And when Pete went into the Big Brother house, he became a sensation because of all of his tics with his Tourette's. I remember when he would bark or he would make a particular noise, everybody in the house that was in the Big Brother house would turn around and they would, you know, they would look or they would laugh or they would say something. But as the programme moved on, which was a social experiment, as the programme moved on, Pete's tics just became Pete's tics.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody batted an eyelid when he was having a conversation with him and he would move his head or he would bark or he would do something. So it was when does something that becomes an intention that you have within a workplace
Yes.
to be socially acceptable, to be inclusive, become a habit?
Yes.
And that takes time, and that takes, and again, the message that I would say, if you're not going to do it well, don't do it, because what you're going to do is you're going to end up doing more harm than good.
That's really helpful. It'd be really interesting to know more about what you do and your team does at Donaldson's in terms of preparing young folk for work.
We probably have to go 2 or 3 steps back, Dorothy.
Yes.
Because the young people typically who come to us have been a bit battered and bruised by the mainstream schooling system. And it's not because they have necessarily any intellectual difficulties, but what they do have is differences that a mainstream the mainstream teaching model finds difficult to accommodate. So as a mainstream school pupil, you have to sit in a class of 25, 30. You have to listen to a teacher who has a particular teaching style that you need to adapt your learning style to. The bell goes after 55 minutes and there's a herd of elephants that are all moving from one place to another, scraping their chairs and goodness knows what else. And you're walking along the corridor, and because you've not got the right shoes on, or because you've decided that you want your hair to be bright blue, somebody has a dig at you and pokes you and starts bullying you, etc., etc. Now, all of that would put somebody who's neurodivergent, or most people actually would put into a high state of arousal. And when somebody's in a high state of arousal, it becomes very difficult for them to learn anything. So what happens when young people come to us is that we take away all of those kind of barriers that they've faced. So we don't have a bell, we don't have uniforms, we don't have teachers as such. We do have tutors who tutor young people in particular subject areas. But those tutors adapt to the learning styles of those young people. But first and foremost, what we focus on is well-being. and reducing stress and anxiety. Because if there's one thing that I would say is a common theme among neurodivergent people that I've known, is that high state of anxiety. That living in a state where they're sort of constantly feeling stress, and that can really take its toll in lots of different ways, and goes on, as you said in your introduction, potentially to develop into mental health issues. If those kind of stresses and anxieties aren't addressed in some way through adjustments, or through counselling, or through self-acceptance, or all of those kind of things, it can be really, really debilitating for someone to have that level of stress. So our focus is on stress reduction, well-being development, and helping that young person have their own toolbox, not our toolbox, their own toolbox that they can dip into when they need to reach out for something that's going to be able to help them to feel better about themselves, or to feel safe. And from that, actually, it's not too difficult then to look at how would that person go into employment, because they've got their toolbox.
Right.
And they've got that ability to be able to say to their employer, this is what I need. And I'm bringing that to you, and here is what you can do for me that's actually going to make things better. But what we're seeing is that what we're doing is the exception rather than the rule. And it is, we've got this sort of, it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of the number of young people, not just neurodivergent young people, but young people who might be trans, young people who may have other significant difficulties at home, who the mainstream schooling system isn't able to accommodate, not necessarily because they're doing it all wrong, but it just doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, it is really interesting and good, and where we always come back to individual needs, don't we?
Yes, absolutely.
And we are not particularly, we need to be reminded of that regularly, I think, and not be making assumptions about everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I see, Rona, there's a few questions popping up. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just looking at our time as well, so we
Yes,
probably need to crack on with that. So yeah, a few great questions come in. One that we've thought of before, actually, and it's probably the most common one, I think, for people in the workplace, but how do you sensitively broach the subject if you think if an employee doesn't disclose that they are neurodivergent, but you think that they might be?
Mm-hmm. I'll answer that first, and then I'm sure, Laura, you might have something. Mm-hmm. I suppose what we always end up with that is you will have issues with employees anyway in the workplace. Sickness, absence, we do work on domestic abuse. You might be worried about their performance is low and you can't understand it. And you would be should be having that one-to-one conversation of how are you? I've noticed that. And I guess in treating everybody equally but trying to identify what their particular needs are, my thoughts would come from that direction. So don't know, Laura, if that's what you would feel as well.
Absolutely, I would agree there. But what I would say, and I've just read the question from Lauren, there is a point where a reasonable adjustment becomes unreasonable.
Yes.
And I think there's risk assessments that would need to be done alongside those reasonable adjustments, because if there's a risk to patients that I'm seeing there, then that then becomes unreasonable. And employers shouldn't then be worried about saying to someone, well, actually, you can't commit to your role, you can't do your role, as long as they are able to demonstrate that they have put reasonable adjustments in place, and those reasonable adjustments simply haven't been enough to help that person to do the job. It may well be that person's skills lies in a completely different area. But again, sometimes it takes time to go through all of that to get to that point. But you can't keep making adjustments to the point that you're putting other people at risk.
Absolutely. There is a line, absolutely. And I suppose if someone doesn't disclose to you, you are having that conversation of, is there anything that we can do to help you with your performance or your attendance and whatever? And then it's whatever comes out of that, you need to go with. And
Yes.
not, yeah, you just have to go with the information you have. Absolutely.
I think the other thing is that, again, where you have that inclusive workplace, where people feel confident to be able to disclose things, actually it comes with flipping it the other way around, and looking at how do you celebrate
Yes.
things that, you know, how do you celebrate things that are different? You've got all of the really good work that's been done in the Pride movement to move things on so much more than they were many years ago, where people were frightened to say, to talk about their sexuality within the workplace. And for the most part, that has changed. But I think this is a new diversity in that sense, that people are recognising within the equality, diversity, inclusion frameworks, that should be treated in a similar way. Actually, let's celebrate, let's look to at what skills people have, and what we can do to support areas where people might need a bit of help.
Okay, thank you. Another one or two, depending on how long they are.
Okie doke. Well, we've got one. Does a highly sensitive person fall under neurodiversity?
I'm happy to answer that, Dorothy.
Thank you.
I think the difference between neurodivergence and the pathological model is that you can identify as neurodivergent without having a diagnosis. So if somebody feels that the description of neurodivergence fits them well with the profile of who they are, then they can identify as neurodivergent. So that's where there's a difference between that having a diagnosis and identifying as neurodivergent. Again, Dorothy, we've talked a wee bit about that. Well, what on earth does that mean for employers?
I know.
But I think we talked. The last question kind of answers that. That if you take away take away labels, take away all of those kind of things, and if you're doing everything that you can to support somebody in the workplace to be the best person that they can, or to be able to do the job the best way they can, then it really doesn't matter whether they've got a diagnosis or not, because it's denying those adjustments is what gets employers into trouble.
And I guess we do get strung up with, is it covered by the Disability or the Equality Act? Do we have an occupational health report that says that they do need a reasonable adjustment? What does that reasonable adjustment look like? And we might have, and it might be appropriate to have all of that. But anyone, you're right, whether they will have their own needs in that workplace, and then it's up to the employer to decide do we have enough information to allow us to make an adjustment, a reasonable adjustment for that person without compromising health and safety, well-being of other people, etc. And for us not to get so totally strung up on having somebody else, occupational health, etc., telling us. Okay, Rona.
So we've probably got time for the last one, which we may have covered a little bit when we were talking about technology and how to deal with that side of things. But there was a question about what are the kinds of things to look out for that might trigger a negative reaction or a stress in someone who is neurodivergent. Anything that might that employers should be mindful of if they don't actually know their employees? But there might be quite a simple answer to that one.
I think I'm back to individual needs and talking to the person, because it'll be different for everybody.
They will be different for everybody, but there's one that's quite common that we see with the young people in our place, and it's I think it's called misphonia, and it's the real trigger when you hear somebody eating, particularly things like an apple or a packet of crisps. It can annoy the best of us, but you can, it's like pins in ears. So again, just looking out for where people, lunch, can we have a space that people can have a quiet space as well as a group space, that kind of thing. Smells can be triggers. Lights, I hear a lot of the time, can be triggers, and particularly the lights that flash, the, what do you call them? Fluorescent lights, so that less desk lamps or lamps that you can attach to your computer, those kind of things can actually be of great benefit. But I just seen something pop in there, and I know that there's lots of 1970s buildings that fluorescent lighting was the most wonderful thing out. And it's difficult to overcome that. But somewhere even within that office that has more natural light can make a difference if somebody gets a seat by the window that can help them. Or it may well be that they're hyposensitive and they would want somewhere that was darker, somewhere that didn't have so much light, somewhere that they could control the light, like a light on a computer. So I know it's not always easy. It's easier for me to sit here and say, oh, just change all your lights. And that's not going to happen. But it's looking at what you could potentially do within a space that could make even a small difference.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Laura. I think looking at our time, it's probably time for our case study from Laura. So I'm going to hopefully unpin myself and share the slides, and Laura will let me know when. Oh, there we go. Is it okay, Laura?
Yeah, that's great, Dorothy. Thank you. So this is just a small taster, I suppose, of a presentation that I do with employers, businesses, organisations, universities, etc. Across the UK. And one of the things that I go into the presentation saying is, what are you going to unlearn today? Because I think Dorothy and I have talked quite a few on quite a few occasions over the past half hour or so about assumptions. So if we are looking then to try and dispel those assumptions, we might need to unlearn before we start to learn. So that's why we've titled it in this way. Next slide, Dorothy, please. So just a wee visual to help explain the difference in terms of language. So each of us, the bottom group there, are neurodiverse. So that includes all of us. But in terms of an individual who's neurodivergent, here are some and not all of the conditions that may be classed as neurodivergent. What other thing that I would like to make sure that I dispel today is that neurodivergence isn't another word for autism. There is it's much wider than that. So it does include bipolar disorder, epilepsy, dyslexia, dyspraxia, OCD, and anxiety-related disorders. But the focus is that difference in the bottom there. There's those who are neurotypical who are still under that umbrella of neurodiversity. Bipolar disorder is PPD. Somebody's asked that question.
All right.
Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you a wee bit about Ziggy. Ziggy, if you go into the next slide, please, Dorothy. At 6 years old, Ziggy was diagnosed with dyslexia and dyscalculia. So dyscalculia, for those who might not know, is difficulty with understanding and processing numbers. Ziggy was diagnosed with that quite early on, so there was very little dubiety around some of the difficulties that there were for Ziggy at school and primary school. And then at 16, diagnosed with OCD, and how that came about was something called tricyclemania. And what that means is somebody who is anxious pulls out their hair, pulls out their eyelashes, pulls out their eyebrows, what have you. So that was the way that OCD manifests itself in Ziggy. And a lot of that was to do with something called streaming at school, where those who were the most academically bright were put in the top category of the stream, and those who struggled were put in the bottom category, and they were all kind of lumped together, whether they wanted to learn or not, they were put in that stream. And Ziggy very much wanted to learn, and some of the friends that Ziggy had were in the top stream. So there was that real stress and pull on what actually has Ziggy done to deserve this. So later on, social anxiety really overtook, and Ziggy attempted to take his life on a number of occasions. He just couldn't cope anymore. He couldn't understand what it was that he was doing wrong all of the time to feel as though he just continuously failed. Nothing that he could do would be right. He had a drumming exam because he was incredibly good at music, had a drumming exam where he did a really beautiful piece on the drums, and the invigilator examiner gave an incredibly big round of applause because it was so good. But he also failed at the same time because he didn't play what it was that he had been asked to play. And that kind of sums Ziggy up. A little bit of edginess there in terms of following the crowd. But at 18, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Next slide, please. Sorry, please. I'm going to read you something now that Ziggy wrote. Who is she? I know this child, she once was me. I reckon she's 4 years old here, maybe 3. She always loves to paint her face, and her ever-changing hair is wild and all over the place. She hasn't learned to follow the crowd, and she never will, even if she was allowed. It's clear that she's a bit of a loner. She always will be. She won't let anyone ever own her. She doesn't need a special occasion to get dressed up, nor does she need a reason to apply her outrageous makeup. Her wardrobe is flamboyant and blindingly colourful, for every day is a live show and never a rehearsal. Through her life, she'll be marked down and held back for being dyslexic, but she'll fight for her rights. She's her own biggest critic. She dreams of being a star in art, music, or even TV, but perhaps she won't ever know for certain who she truly wants to be. I know this child. I reckon she's 4 years old, maybe 3. I wonder how this child would feel if she knew she would grow up to be me. And I read that because this assumption around someone who has a diagnosis of autism that makes it difficult then for them to feel empathy or difficult for them to introspect. It kind of busts that myth when you read that actually this is a real example of introspection and being able to look at yourself and see, yes, what you're good at, but also some of the things that you struggle with, and being able to put that into some kind of narrative. Next slide, please. So this is Ziggy today. He's a successful writer, he's an artist, he's a musician. He's also a social carer for his brother. He's a photographer, and next slide. He is also happy in his own skin. Ziggy is a trans man, and he last year had top surgery. And I see a man now who has never necessarily been happier, one, by understanding who he is in terms of his neurodivergence, but also being able to accept who he is in terms of being a trans man. Why do I know so much about Ziggy? Well, Ziggy is my son. And we have been on this journey together, and it has been difficult. I won't lie about that. But I've seen the outcome in terms of getting the right support at the right time and what that can actually do to a person to make them feel whole again. And Ziggy's a very good example of that. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be quite brief in going through this. The person-centred approach that I talked about earlier on is the one that we employ within the Donaldson Trust, and one that a number of HR departments that we've spoken to have been particularly interested in employing within their own organisation. Next slide, please. So it uses a conversational map. It is annotated and again, very much dependent on who's facilitating. The use of drawing, the use of words, the use of cartoons, all of those kind of things can be incorporated as well. But it does look at a life journey. How did you get to the point that you are just now? What are your dreams? What are your nightmares? What are your skills? What are your talents? And what are your qualities? And the next slide shows some examples of what they look like. And what I would say is that no two look the same. Why? Because no two of us are the same. And everybody's had a different journey to get to where they're at just now. Everybody has different dreams, different nightmares. But sometimes the difficulty for our young people, because they've had so much negativity, is they really struggle to think about what their dreams are. And what their skills are, and what their attributes are, and what they're much easier talking about is what their nightmare is, because that's where they are right now. And the work of the facilitator very much is to help them to be able to identify at least one positive thing to say about themselves, and at least one objective to aim for in terms of that personal dream, personal goal. Next slide, please. And what we've got here is just some examples that we've put together over the years in relation to what people want as far as their dreams are concerned. And what you'll see there is a lot of it is just really ordinary needs to go back into education somehow, to be able to be less anxious, to have some kind of social life. Again, that anxiety is that thread that comes through so often, just to be able to cope and to be able to have some kind of independence. Some of the young people that we work with before they came to us, hadn't been out of the bedroom in 2 years. One occasion I spoke to a dad and said to him, you know, how does it feel living with your daughter who's never been out of her bedroom in 2 years? And he said to me, actually, the best part of the day is when I go up to her room and see that she's still alive. So these are our children who are living in this year 2023, who struggle so much with mainstream schooling and a mainstream environment, which if you adopt into a mainstream workplace, then carries on that potential nightmare for them. Next slide. And this is about nightmares. So again, as I said, much easier to be able to identify. I think one I would draw your attention to is the one in the bottom right-hand corner, not being able to be myself. And what we hear a lot about is masking and pretending to be normal, in inverted commas, trying to fit in. Particularly girls really struggle with fitting in, so they'll do what they can to mask all their differences. So that they are able to be in a particular group of friends who will accept them. But that is exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And what you'll find is that those same young people will go home and have serious meltdowns, where they end up, they just have to go to bed because they're so exhausted, or they'll cry, or they'll self-injure, or they'll do whatever they need to do to get that anxiety, that pain of struggling not to be themselves out in some way, unable to control that anxiety, having lack of support, and being and remaining stuck. Next slide, please. And these are the dreams, these are the sort of skills and attributes that we have heard over the year. And these are, as I said, some of the most difficult ones to help young people to identify. But there's never been a person-centred planning meeting where we've not been able to find something that somebody who is having the person-centred planning meeting is able to identify about themselves. And that big one across the middle came from a person-centred planning meeting with somebody that was incredibly stuck. And it was several hours we were in that meeting, and there was absolutely nothing that young person found that they could say was good about themselves, apart from eventually identifying that they had a beautiful soul. But that was the start of the journey for them to be able to become unstuck, because we could work with that. It was something for us to work with. It was something for her to work with, something for her family to work with. Next slide, please. And this is the last thing that I'd like to leave you on, and it's from a woman called Kay Stone. And she has written that we have tied our self-worth to their statements, and at some point we must begin the slow and arduous process of breaking free and seeing that we are more than they said we were. So that kind of confirms that subject matter that we've been going on about around assumptions. And Kaya is a neurodivergent young woman herself, and she's somebody who's a real advocate for the neurodivergent community. She talks about her tribe, and she talks about breaking through some of the stigmas and the assumptions that are out there of what people can't do, and that actually is a battle in itself. The next slides are some links to the Donaldson Trust. We've also got some resources, and the last time I sent out some books that we as the Donaldson Trust would recommend if anybody wants to do any further reading. Thank you.
Laura, what a powerful presentation and case study. Thank you so much. Really, really
Welcome.
impressive. Thank you. Rona, we've got 2 minutes. Anything you want to pick up, or I'll hand over to you?
No, there's nothing else coming through. So yeah, we just hope that everyone has really found it so interesting and had a chance to ask the questions that you had in your head. But if you want to send some later, that's also absolutely fine.
Okay, so thanks very much, everybody. Really good to see you all. And just to say that we're in conversation with Siggy, and we're hoping that Siggy will come and online the way we've done with Laura, and a conversation with Siggy. So we're looking at dates for that just now. So be on the lookout. Thank you all so much. Lovely to see you all, and see you next time.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. It's great.